Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Here on Well, Hello Anxiety, we've talked about the nervous system and anxiety in relation to mental health and well-being, parenting and resilience and more. But today I'm speaking with an expert in high performance. And I cannot wait to chat to today's guest so we can actually all get a better understanding of the actions that we can take to make sure that when it's our time to shine, whether that's at work, whether that's on the stage if you're a performer, on a metaphorical stage, or perhaps even on the sporting field, or if you're a coach or a teacher, it could be supporting the people that you work with to shine when the pressure's on. Really, I wanted to talk to Michael Allison today so we can all learn more about our nervous system and how we can consistently perform to our potential. And also, if anxiety is standing in the way of you stepping up, stepping out, or making a big change, or getting on that metaphorical stage, we've got you covered too. Before I welcome Michael, who's joining us from Santa Barbara, to the podcast, I'm going to share a little of what I recently heard him say. I absolutely love this, and I wanted to sort of share this with you before we say hello to Michael. When our performance doesn't match our true potential, it's not that we aren't good enough. It's not that we're not trying hard enough. It's not that we don't want it badly enough. It's not even that we need to practice harder and train more and get tougher and get more willpower and grit. It's none of those things. It's simply we have to learn to care for those bodily reactions that are reflexively occurring to stress and pressure so we can execute how we are when we're at our best and perform to our potential. I just loved hearing you say that, Michael, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here to the podcast. I'm joined by Michael Allison, and I can't wait to get stuck in. So, Michael, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for sharing that quote. That really sums it up, and we can hopefully dive into really what I mean behind that.
Please do. And Michael, I want to say, listeners, oh, goodness, my breathing and my physiology is a little dysregulated at the moment because we had some tech issues, and given the time difference, I'm here at the studio here at Positive Media super early in the morning, and our producer is also producing the Brekkie Show. And so when there were a few tech issues, we had to get the wonderful Adam to dive in, and he was able to sort of remotely log into this computer that I'm sitting at. And Michael, you've been so patient, and Michael could probably see my shoulders lifting and my breathing change. And this is a moment where it was my time to shine and I wasn't shining. So anyway, thank you for your patience, Michael. So tell us about you, please.
Well, I got into Polyvagal Theory and then developed what you just introduced, this application of Polyvagal Theory and understanding the nervous system and our bodily reactions to pressure, to stress, to uncertainty, to competition, to evaluation, and applied it into a methodology that really is about optimizing performance, optimizing resilience. And whether it's on a stage, whether, as you said in your introduction, whether it's just having a difficult conversation with someone you love and care about, whether it's in the workplace, the stage is really life. And it's really a metaphor for just recognizing what's actually happening in our body, which is what was happening with us in this technical blip. And recognizing how those physiological shifts that are really adaptive and reflexive, how that changes everything, how that influences how you experience the world and how the world experiences you, right? So what happened for us is actually a really good lead-in to this conversation.
It really is. And I said to Michael in the chat, because Michael could hear me, but I couldn't hear him. So I was chatting and I said, I'm trying to regulate my physiology at this time. And the fact that you said that it really is a metaphor for life, because you know, listeners will be coming from all walks of life with all types of pressures and uncertainties. and we try to often sort of resort to thinking our way through our challenges, don't we? And that's not really what is helpful and what is impactful and what is effective and what makes powerful change. But before we sort of dive more into that, I'd love you to share a bit more about polyvagal theory, because it's a really important area for us to have an overview of, because there's so much depth, of course. And we have had Jessica Maguire here on the podcast talking to us about this before, but I love your take on it, and I love that you have founded what you call the Playzone. And I wonder if you could, just in simple terms, step listeners who haven't been introduced to the polyvagal theory before through what it is, and perhaps even could you do that in the context of sport or a story that you could share?
Yeah. And so polyvagal theory is this tremendous body of work by Stephen Porges, and it was really his study of the nervous system over essentially 4 decades. And to make it something that we can talk about in less than 5 or 6 hours, there are a couple organizing principles within it that I think are really important. And the first being that our physiological state, so if we just reflect on our experience up to this point today, technical difficulties are a violation of what we expected. It came out of the unknown. It was uncertain. It was unpredictable, just like life, right? And we live in this culture that really is unpredictable, and it's moving really rapidly. And we're under constant evaluation in many, many ways, whether it's in education, whether it's even in healthcare, we're being assessed, whether we're on the stage and performing, and there's a lot of competition. Okay, so from the nervous system's vantage point, from its perspective, uncertainty, competition, evaluation, unpredictable change, violations of expectancy, those are giant cues of risk and threat to the nervous system. And so they trigger these reflexive shifts in our physiology. And what I mean by that is they trigger changes in our heart rate patterns, our breathing, our muscle tension, our whole way that we're creating energy, our metabolic output. And what's really fascinating in addition to that, it's also changing our facial expressions, our tone of voice and pitch of voice and rhythm of voice and pace of voice. And so polyvagal theory, it really showed the neuroanatomy and the neurophysiology beneath what it really means to be human, and how our physiology has these reflexive reactions to both threat and uncertainty, but on the other side, safety and connection and warmth and welcome coming from each other. So when we were having that experience together, the best thing that we could do is send each other cues through our own intonation of voice and our facial expressions that, hey, you know what? It's going to be okay. We're actually in this together. We're not alone. We're actually a team trying to bring this to the public. So to me, that's what polyvagal theory is. It explains the neurophysiology, the neuroanatomy, the transition from asocial reptiles to what we are today as social mammals, and how we have this unique capacity to detect safety, warmth, welcome, and to communicate and collaborate. And we know that intuitively, but what it also does is when we communicate in that way that's supportive or trusting or even playful, we change our physiology to support our health and our well-being. And that then feeds into more connection and safety and trust. So that's the theory to me in a really simplistic way. And so when we recognize that, when we go on stage or when we step up to the line to serve in tennis and the pressure is really, really boiling, we can recognize that in that moment, our physiology might feel like this is really unsafe. This is really, really dangerous. Doesn't matter what we're thinking, right? So this is happening in more primitive centers in the brainstem, really. And we're taking in all of this information. So if there's a bunch of fans sitting over here and I'm stepping up to the line to serve, and my family's over here watching and they're really, really anxious and nervous, they're sending cues to me without intention in their face, in their body language, in their posture, the way they're breathing, even the sounds of their voice, even if they're rooting for me, but their sound is high pitched or really, really low and there's not a lot of frequency, my body's interpreting that as, oh boy, there's a lot of tension, right? So all of this is coming in, and now I can have my own physiological reaction to that. And in sport, we've been taught the old paradigm is you just gotta make it happen. You gotta make that body perform. You gotta focus more. You gotta zone in. Like, don't look at anything. You gotta all these things. You gotta be more mentally tough. You gotta repress and hide your emotions. You gotta act stoic. All of these things. And what I'm saying is actually no. We have to first meet our body where it is. It's what you did when we were having our thing is you recognized that actually your body was a little unsettled. You recognized that your breathing changed, right? And you recognized you had some tension. So you did a couple of breaths, and then I saw you just kind of settle, and you did. And that's the stuff that the body recognizes, that the brainstem recognizes as, you know what? It might be dangerous. It might be uncertain. There might be a lot of evaluation. There might be a competitor on the other side. But actually, in this moment, I'm actually okay. I can actually settle in. And I'll lead into the Playzone to me is that often in most of our culture, most of our systems, whether it's at work, whether it's playing, even when it's dating, in academics, the loudest voice or the person who channels that uncertainty that they're feeling into attacking and into making something happen and into fighting and being aggressive, they tend to rise to the top in a lot of our systems. But there's another level of performance. And when I talk to high performers in whatever it is, whether it's in business or sport or on stage, and I ask them this question, you can ask yourself this question. When you have absolutely been at your best, whether it was creating art, whether it was playing tennis, playing basketball, whether it was giving a speech, when you were absolutely at your best, what did that feel like? And I have yet to hear anyone tell me in that moment that they felt like they were fighting for their life, that they were aggressive and making something happen. They were free. They were playing. And that's really a completely different underlying physiology.
It is, and that question, it's such a powerful question. I'm gonna repeat it. When you were absolutely at your best, what did that feel like? And what you were saying before about those that we can see in society and online, of course we can see the loudest voices and what we might interpret as the biggest personalities, the most confidence, rising to the top. And that can then make it hard for, a listener might be listening and thinking, gosh, I've got this idea that I feel so passionate about, but might have had the cognition that I don't have the confidence to even say it out loud, let alone promote it or teach people about it or rave about it or share my excitement about it. And that's just sort of one example, and it could lead to the boardroom where you've got an idea you want to share, but you feel like the biggest voices are the ones that will be listened to. Or like you were saying in tennis, and here in Australia, Aussie rules football, Australian rules football, the AFL is our national sport. And one of the things that I'll often do if I'm speaking with, say, senior students to help them with exam stress and routines to support them with their physiology and to help understand kind of the way they respond and what they can do about it, I will not always talk about exams. I'll talk about lining up to score when the siren's gone, and if you kick the goal, you win the game, and if you don't, you lose. Doing the audition because you desperately want to be in that play and get that lead role in that, in the school musical, or sharing the examples that this relates to all of that. So coming back to this idea that the loudest voices are the ones that are the most prevalent in what we see in whatever sphere we're in. Can you talk us through what people can do to build that capacity to have the awareness of physiological changes and what's stopping them and what's standing in the way of being able to get to that place where we feel at our best and are able to do the things that are really important to us?
Yeah. Well, first is just acknowledge that it is a fact that our biology, when we put ourselves out there, okay, when we speak to a crowd that we don't know how we're going to be received, when we actually voice something that hasn't been voiced, when we tap into what's really authentic and meaningful for us, and we don't know how that will be welcomed, that is perfectly natural to have a bodily reaction to doing that, okay? To not necessarily feel confident. So the first part is not feeling confident makes a lot of sense. And that's okay. And what you said is feeling confident. So confidence actually comes out of the physiology. Confidence isn't just sitting up here in the cortex. It's actually a feeling that then aligns with this, I've got this, but it starts in the body. So the first part is recognizing that, okay, in this moment, in this context, I don't feel confident to share my voice, which really means my body in this moment doesn't feel safe enough to actually be who I really am. That's all that it means, okay? It means nothing else. It doesn't mean that you actually don't know what you're going to say. It doesn't mean that you aren't skilled. It doesn't mean that you don't, like you said in the intro, it doesn't mean that you're emotionally weak or mentally not strong. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is that your physiology in this context, in this moment, doesn't feel regulated enough, doesn't feel safe enough, doesn't have that confidence. And so now, what can we do little by little, day by day, situation by situation, that your body, my body, welcomes? That those very primitive survival networks actually welcome as, oh, you know what? This isn't that dangerous, and it's actually not that bad, or even worse, it's not life-threatening, right? So that's what we're looking for. But the first part is awareness, meeting your own body where it is, without judgment, without shame, without criticism, and recognizing that that's a natural reaction. And even the loudest voice has that. It's just the loudest voice feels that and goes, "Rah!" and takes it and just unloads, okay? There's a different way to do that. And that's what we're getting at, is just, but first meet the body where it is. And then let's start finding ways that we can start reassuring. I'm gonna share a quick story, not related to Australian football, but Australian tennis. So the French Open is happening right now, okay? And one of your players who I love, Alex de Minaur, okay? He's a player that doesn't have, in the world of tennis, he doesn't have a lot of weapons. He's not a big guy. He doesn't overwhelm anyone, okay? But he's lightning fast, and he stays within himself. He's doing what we're talking about really, really well. But there's another part to this, is not feeling alone. Okay, so in the business meeting too, not feeling alone is really, really powerful to help the body settle in to feel confident. So what Alex de Minaur did before his before the round of 16 against Daniil Medvedev, who's a top player, he knew it was going to be a challenge. He remembered this kid being on the sidelines a year ago, screaming for him. So he put out on social media, I don't know who you are or who you were, but you were at this match 3 years ago or 2 years, whatever, and I'd love for you to come. And they found the kid. The kid came. The kid sat there on the thing. And at the end of the match, de Minaur wins the match. He runs over, he hugs the kid, high fives him, all this, and he brings him out for an interview. And then he shares in a post-match interview that after every single point, he could hear that kid's voice of support after every point, and how powerful that is. That is a new paradigm. See, the old paradigm says you got to do this on your own. You got to figure out a way to gain control of yourself. de Minaur's smarter than that, because he's actually aligning with his biology. Really, in our biology, we're not meant to do any of this alone. We have to find trusting relationships first, and then we can self-regulate. So he went right to that, and he found this kid. It's a beautiful story, but that's polyvagal theory in action. That's the Playzone in action. He's receiving cues of support and play and trust and all of that from this kid, and that helped enable him in his own body to feel safe enough to feel confident and to win that match. It's beautiful.
that is an absolutely beautiful story. And it speaks to this idea that we can turn to others to support us with our own nervous system regulation. And that can help us to then develop the skills, can't it, to be able to better regulate when we are on our own. When we might have the support and it might not be in that location with us when we do need to perform and we do need to shine. So how can we make that kind of transfer? Demonor was able to have this kid by the sideline, and he's probably really internalising that now, and he probably can't take this child to every tournament with him. But how can we take on board this support that we have from others that helps us to regulate and find that play zone, and sort of use it and utilise it when we are on our own and it's time to record a video for a YouTube channel, if that's what you're doing, or to speak up with a new idea in a group of colleagues, or to put your hand up for an opportunity that feels like a stretch that you want to say yes to, but your body's screaming, no, don't do it. How can we sort of bring that co-regulation that somebody else offers us to those big moments?
Yeah, so we can do what you already hinted at, is once we've had that experience of truly feeling like supported by another, feeling like we're part of a team, feeling like we're not alone, but we actually belong. Once we actually have that experience, which we're meant to have when we're born, I mean, we're meant to have that. Like, that's what our biology, when we're born, we're meant to have that with our caregiver, with our mother, right? And not all of us have that. So that is a fact. For some of us, we didn't have that. But once we have that in our life, once we touch that, we can draw that back up once we've felt that. And so it doesn't have to be, again, that kid traveling with him to every match, although that would be great. But he can remember that feeling at any moment. He can draw up an image of that kid, of that smiling kid and screaming for him. And the key is to not just see the image, but to let that image then percolate through the body and actually get that felt sense of what it was like when you were in that interaction with someone who was supporting you. So that's one way, right? So it's just get the image. That's what imagery is. Imagery is about getting that image of a prior experience going, but letting it feel in your body, which physiologically is changing your heart rate, changing your heart rate patterns, changing your breathing, changing your muscle tension. That's why it works, if it works. If you just draw up the image, but it doesn't actually shift your physiology, then it's not going to work. So you have to just tap into the feeling. And that's what we're getting at. So in addition to that sort of imagery, you can also, in the room or on the stage or on the court, you can find those faces, those bodies that are sending you vibes of connection, vibes of support, vibes of I'm with you, I'm not alone, right? And so that's what I try to teach a lot of coaches and a lot of parents, right? So working with a lot of high-level players in all different sports, during the actual match or the game, from my perspective, the coach or the family's or the friend's biggest role is to actually support the player through their body language, through their facial expressions, through that intonation of their voice, more than what they're actually saying. Right? So that's a really important point, is that we as the supporter to whomever, our role really is to feel our own shifts in our physiology, just like the performer, and then do what we can to regroup so that we can send subconsciously, we can send the facial expressions, the body language, and the actual sound in our voice that our player needs. So if I'm the player or the performer or the person wanting to speak up, I'm going to be, as I'm getting ready and I start to feel my body shift and I start to feel that tension, and then I hear the story of, no, don't speak up today. No, you'll do it next time. Oh, just don't do it, right? Okay. That story is just making sense of this change in the physiology in this context. Okay. And it's tied to associations from before and all that, but it starts with that physiological shift. So when you have that, okay, you can then maybe draw up the image of someone who truly cares about you and see if that helps settle. You can look for other faces. You can key into any other voices that are sharing, that are reassuring to you, right? So that's another thing. You can help yourself just settle into your chair. You can feel your feet on the ground. You can allow yourself to really orient. Those are the types of signals and sensory information that the really primitive parts of our nervous system want and that receive. So it's things like that, really primitive.
So when you're talking about the nervous system and this threat that has been detected, can you, and also the ways in which bringing our attention to our feet touching the floor, to things that are in our awareness that we weren't paying attention to, our clothes on our back, our bottom sitting on our chair, or our breath, or the sounds that we can hear, all of these ways that we can do it. We're doing it through our body. And I've got sort of two questions. The first part of my question relates to this idea that the brain can't tell the difference between what might be life-threatening or an opportunity uncertainty. So I'd love you to speak to that, and how by using our physiology, so we build this awareness. You're stepping us through really beautifully. Recognize at first, I don't feel safe. The brain has detected a threat. Then draw on this idea that I'm not alone, and really tune into this felt sense of being supported. And as you've shared so many beautiful examples, think about the person and think about what they look like if they're not in the room with you, or tap into that person who, when I'm giving a talk, and I'm sure you're the same, you'll find a couple of people in the audience who you know are just really on this journey with you. And I was this person for another speaker at a conference last week, and she came up to me later and she said, "Thank you so much for being so interested and for nodding, and I like to be that person because I appreciate those people when I'm on the stage." And so if you could talk to us about this idea that these threats, the body's reacting as if these threats are genuine threats to safety, and how we show our brain we're okay and that we're safe through our physiology.
Yeah, so I think it's helpful, at least it's helpful for me and the people that I tend to work with, to understand the progression. So as soon as we step into an environment that is unfamiliar, or where even if there's just a lot of bodies in that space, and if we don't have strong relationships built in trust with those bodies, and they're unfamiliar, and now we might have to speak any of that. So that really is pitted against our fundamental biological need to feel safe, to feel trusting, to feel like we belong, because we actually don't know if we belong. So the first part is, as we enter any of those types of environments or interactions, our body is going to mobilize. It's going to mobilize resources in an effort to prepare us to either fight and attack, or to escape and get the heck out of there. So we're going to have that. So it could be, you could look out there and you could see someone on their phone, but they're not paying attention to you. It has nothing to do with you, but it doesn't matter. It's a cue of disinterest, is what you were trying to do to as you already know, that if you can really send vibes of through body language, you can help the speaker. So that isn't always happening. So at every moment, we are subconsciously scanning every body around us. We're picking up on all of this sensory information. Most of these cues coming in, we're completely unaware of. Okay. And what you framed is that there are certain cues that we can direct our attention toward. We can start to recognize that we're never going to actually detect all of the different features that our nervous system is detecting. Not a chance, and it doesn't really even matter. But what we can become quicker and more efficient at recognizing are those little shifts in our physiology to whatever it's detecting, to whatever our nervous system is detecting. And then, as you've already suggested, now it's really the key. It isn't even necessarily about having all of these resources. To me, it's the first part is relating to what's happening in the physiology. How do I relate to that? Okay, so I start to notice that I'm getting unsettled. I start to notice something shifting in my body. Now it's how do I relate to that? Do I relate to that in a way that says, stop it, stop this, why are you doing this? Or do I relate to it in a way that says, oh, when this happens, that's when it means this, oh boy. And now the story is adding more to that. So to me, it's this relationship to that physiology, which is what you were getting at, that is the key. So once we start to recognize that our physiology is moving into a bodily state, an internal environment that either feels unsettled and mobilized and racing, or if that doesn't if we don't relate to that in a way that starts to nurture that, and that all of those conditions stay there, and we're just now the heart's racing even more and the physiology is getting going. And if we get locked into that story of what this means, eventually, and we see this in the world of performance, eventually the body will shut us down. Eventually the body will feel overwhelmed. So I think it's really important, to answer your question, that we first recognize this predictable pattern that the physiology, that the nervous system has to what it's detecting as unsafe, and how if we don't recover or overcome that challenge and that unsafety is still present and relentless, that eventually we will move more into this immobilizing. So the mobilization will be exhausted and we'll begin to immobilize. What does that mean? It means that our heart rate will actually start to slow. Our muscle tension will decrease. It means that we will actually have less metabolic output. Our blood pressure lowers. What does that mean in the world of performance? Well, when we see a player who looks like they're giving up, when we see a team that just, for the whole team, is just kind of collapsing, they don't have any energy, those are not conscious choices or deliberate decisions. Those are bodily reactions to a body or a whole group of bodies that feels completely overwhelmed and has no resource left to navigate that challenge. And so for me, the first part to the answer of your question is, let's just recognize this predictable pattern, respect the physiological shifts that are occurring in ourselves, and if we're in attendance, like you were, in others, and then relating to that in a way that actually meets the body where it is, without blame, without criticism, without saying, knock it off, stop, or we're going to do this. It's about coming alongside of your own physiological response. That's what it is.
And what you said before about it being predictable, I really love that you said that, because we can start to see these patterns. And because it is overwhelming, it can be overwhelming, I should say, depending on how you relate to it. And I guess when we were having these technical issues and they went on for a long time. It took us about 15 minutes to get going. And of course, I'm feeling like, goodness, Michael's given, you've given of your very precious time out of your day, and it feels unprofessional. I'm in a professional studio, and, things happen. And because of the time I'm recording and the availability of support while the Brekkie show's also underway and the like, I could recognize what was happening. I know how my physiology changes. I know that my breathing's the first sign that, okay, this mobilizing's happening. I know what to do about it, and therefore I don't get panicked about it, and I don't spiral. And also I want to say that in the way you related to me non-verbally, because I couldn't hear you, I could just tell through your facial expressions and through the way you were responding, and also through what you were saying in the chat. And as soon as we started talking, the way you related to me in the situation that we'd found ourselves in, that even though that was not the way I would have hoped that our meeting today began, it certainly puts all of this very much front and centre in a real life example that, these things happen. That's life. Life's so unpredictable.
Yeah, this is very relevant information for navigating day-to-day life, right? Like what we just experienced. And I'll point out something in what you shared that was really helpful for you, is that you recognized those changes in your physiology. You also recognized the stories that you started to tell yourself about what you said, this doesn't look professional, I'm wasting his time, all of those things. But you didn't get swept away by the stories. And instead, you look back at me. I was doing what I could too to reassure you that I'm actually okay. It's all fine. I'm just here. It's okay. Right. And so but what often happens, and it happens on the professional stage, it happens in an interaction with your spouse, with your loved one, with your partner, with your children, happens all the time, is that same scenario plays out. All of a sudden, there's a violation of expectancy, complete violation. Somebody said something I had no idea that would come at me. I went to hit this forehand and it sails 5 feet long. What? Okay. Those are violations of expectancy. And again, from those very primitive parts deep in the brain, really at the level of the brainstem, those are cues of risk, uncertainty, danger. And we're going to have a bodily response, which is exactly what you did. That's an appropriate, natural response. And then out of that, I'm unpacking this so it helps to make sense. Out of that bodily response, now that information percolates higher up into the brain, where you're now making a story to make sense of why you feel that. And your story was, oh, this looks really unprofessional, or why I'm wasting his time. And then that sends information back down. And now can either refuel and really exaggerate that physiology and get you really going, or you could recognize that story as just information saying, oh, that means I'm dysregulated. That means I'm starting to feel really quite unsafe and I'm highly mobilized. So, and that's what you did, is then you took a breath and then you looked at me. And so that's the kind of stuff that you can do with intention in an interaction, in a boardroom, on the playing field, is you can just, again, recognize that physiological shift, not for better, not for worse. I don't like it, whatever. It's not good or bad. It just is. And now how can I, which is what you did, how can I relate to that in a way that might be helpful? And it might not always work, right? Like that could have kept going on. You may have had even more of a bodily reaction. You could have kept trying to regulate, nothing worked. And you may have eventually went into that collapse or shutting down. And it may have looked like, let's just reschedule. It may have been like, just wasn't meant to be, whatever. So again, we make up a story to make sense of that physiology actually moving more into that collapse, that immobilized place. And even the greatest champions in any sport, it can still play out. Djokovic, I know he's not Australian.
Doesn't matter. We all know who he is, and that's, yeah.
But we all know who he is. And he, more than anyone in the game of tennis, from my perspective, and I study tennis a lot, he relates to his bodily reactions, his physiological changes better than anyone, right? So when you look at even the greatest champions, we've got Federer, we've got Nadal, and we've got Djokovic. They're no doubt that they have the most Grand Slams, all that stuff. Okay. Federer, he actually, in some of the biggest pressure moments, he didn't know how to relate to when his body lost it. He actually didn't. When you really study it, he was so gifted, and he worked on his technique. He worked on his grace, and he had this beauty in his movement, but he didn't actually, and that beauty of movement actually sends cues back into his body that he feels safe. Once that was lost, he actually didn't know how to relate to it. He didn't have, and then you have Nadal, who plays more in that fight mode that we were talking about. Nadal is much more aggressive and really putting out a lot of effort. But what he does beautifully is he has routines. So these routines that he has after every single point, and this is relatable to life, he has routines that he does that drop him out of the story, that bring his body back into some sense of safety. So that's a really beautiful thing. So routines. So having our own routines in our life, or routines that we do to prepare to speak up, right? That can be super helpful. And that's what Nadal did. But sometimes those routines didn't actually, there was so much pressure, it wouldn't actually help him enough. Djokovic was the one of the three who actually really gets that emotions and thoughts and behaviors are emerging out of his physiology. And he's doing everything he can to relate to his physiology on and off the court. Better than he's articulating it more than any other player that I've seen, even more than the other two.
They're three really good examples, and we'll all watch sport through a different lens now, and there are telltale signs, aren't there, which I'd love to dive into, but won't, because I want to telltale signs like muscle tension and facial expression and breathing. And as with the expertise you have in this space, of course, you're able to see the footage and unpack it and really understand it. And whilst I'd dearly love to find out more about that in the time that we've got left, so I'm interested in this idea of routines. And for the person that is, I guess there's two types of routines, aren't there? And please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm picturing the routine that helps the person kind of prepare in advance of the challenge that they know they're facing, whether it's somebody who wants to speak publicly and openly about something, whether that's on a stage or on a podcast or on LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever that might be. So what you might do ahead of that, and then perhaps what you might do in the moment to regulate your physiology, if whilst you're in the middle of that, you are starting to feel dysregulated, how can you kind of get a handle on what's happening? So it's another double-barreled question. But yeah, if we can talk about routines ahead of the challenge first, that would be, and then if we can finish up with kind of what can you do when you feel, you're losing it, how can we sort of bring it back?
So I'll emphasize the point of the routine too, which you sort of did. So in Nadal's routines, because I don't know Nadal, I don't know if his part of the goal of his routine is to regulate his physiology, or if it was just a routine that developed over time and was really diverting his attention away from getting locked into any narrative about why I can't do this, whatever. I don't know, because I haven't had a discussion, but the kind of routines that we're talking about are routines that are deliberately meant to regulate our physiology, to settle the body, to find more play and less fear, to feel a more sense of safety and less anxiety. Because that's the kind of routine I'm talking about. Now, any routine, because it's predictable and it's what you do and you've done before, has some reassurance to the physiology and has some sense in and of itself, because it's a routine, of calming, quote, the anxiety. Okay. But when you actually now deliberately add things into that routine that lower heart rate, add more of that heart rate patterning, change your breathing, or that relax muscle tension in the face, around the eyes, in the jaw, in the body, those are routines now that add that other component of really amplifying the physiological impact of that routine. Okay, so I just wanted to emphasize that. So that's the kind of routine that I'm talking about. And you can do that before. So example would be, before I get on a podcast, okay, I'll have a whole prep routine. And the routine is not about what I'm going to say. And for an athlete too, like when they warm up, the way I frame this, when they're in that warm up with their opponent, and it's about getting their physiology in the state that's optimal for them, and deliberately moving it in and out of higher and lower levels of metabolic output with control. That's the point of the routine. And so you can do any type of routine that is physiologically based in preparation that brings you into your quote optimal physiological state for whatever that presentation is, or whatever that interaction is. So that's the pre-routine, and it involves breathing. It involves listening. Could involve making sound. Could involve voice, because voice is tied directly to the vagal regulation of our physiology. So I use voice, I use breath, I use movement.
Can you give us a few examples?
Sure. So we know too that as we breathe out, okay, so as we exhale, that's when we pull the brake on the heart. Okay, so that's actually when we slow heart rate. When we inhale, we release that brake and we actually speed up our heart rate. So if we want to actually help ourselves settle, we're going to make a longer exhale than our inhale. So I might deliberately take a very good inhale, but then I'll take a really long 8, 10, 15-second exhale. And while taking exhale, I'll make different sounds and see how my body responds. So you might go, you might match how you feel. You might sigh. So all of those things. And then you can add in movement. So as you're breathing in, maybe you're reaching up and out, looking out, because as soon as we look out, we're changing where we're focusing, which if it were dangerous, we wouldn't be just sort of looking up and out. So we're actually cueing our body that actually this is good. We're good. We're safe. And so you might look up with a big in-breath, and then as you kind of roll toward the ground, you long exhale and make a sound, whatever sound. You might hum. You might just make humming, because humming too is changing that vagal regulation of your heart. So those are types of routines, and it could involve music. Music is super powerful in shifting your physiology. So you script a routine that works for you. That's bringing in the sensory information. That's a preparation routine. Part of it's body, part of it's breath, part of it's sound, part of it's movement, part of it's posture, part of it's muscle tension. So those are the body-based parts that I would put into a routine. And you can make it up, but that's sort of the foundation. And then it's the same thing in the moment, right? So you start recognizing that you're getting really, really amped up, or you start recognizing that you're beyond amped up and now you're actually moving into that collapse. You have different routines and you have different rituals and different things that you do, knowing first where you are, right? So again, that first part is meeting your body where it is. And if I'm overly amped up and I'm now having to give a presentation, as I start to speak, I'm going to apply those same resources. I'm going to actually allow myself to slow down my words deliberately. Right? And I'm going to actually keep saying words slowly before I take my next in-breath, because that's extending my exhale. And then take the in-breath, because remember, exhale is when we slow heart rate. So I might also, as I'm speaking or in that moment, I'm going to look for a friendly face. I'm going to actually, that's my ritual. So I call it the habit of safety, the habit of safety. And it can be a ritual in preparation. It can be a ritual during. And what it is it's finding and feeling and hopefully absorbing the cues that are available to us in any moment, whether we're performing, whether preparing for performing, that our physiology, that our brain stem, that our primitive nervous system actually recognizes as safe, as connecting, as welcoming. And we look around us in the environment, right? And we listen and we smell and we see. And then we also look at each other and we listen and we feel. And then we also go internal, which is that breath, which is that contact, those contact points, that feeling, that opening, that muscle tension. So that's the habit of safety.
The habit of safety. That is a really lovely way to think about it. And for all of us to develop our own habits of safety and to draw on what you've shared around the example that you shared that you will use and when I present, yesterday when I was giving a talk, I realised I was talking quite fast because I have an anxiety diagnosis but I care so deeply about what I'm doing. I'm so passionate about it. I obviously feel anxious because I care, and we need that certain amount of mobilisation. And I recognised that I was doing it, and then I immediately was able to lengthen my exhale, slow down, and talk through for my audience who were there to learn about exactly this, what I was doing and why I was doing it. And also what I found that I always will verbalise the fact that I feel anxious because I care about this. This is very normal. And in simply labelling it, I am also kind of bringing up those higher brain centres to sort of, make a difference with how much I can control what's happening.
Yeah. Well, can I so from a polyvagal perspective, from the nervous system's perspective, in your audience, you may have already talked about this in prior episodes, I don't know. From the polyvagal perspective, that what we call anxiety or what we call nervous is a label. It's a psychological construct to make sense of that physiological shift, that feeling or that not feeling in the body. Okay, so it's just a construct. I don't mean just a construct to diminish how that's not what I mean. But I mean that it's really just to make sense of a cluster of bodily feelings that are really coming metaphorically from a body that in that moment doesn't trust that it's safe to feel safe. That's it. So to me, this journey of whether it's performance, whether it's helping ourselves relate to, quote, our anxiety, it's finding ways and relationships and bodily resources and maybe daily practices like that routine, like that habit of safety. It's finding what our body will begin to trust and welcome so that it can relinquish its defenses, so that it actually trusts that it's safe to feel safe without being on guard, without being prepared to run and attack or escape or hide, right? And then ultimately to trust that it's safe to be with someone else and feel like we're part of a team, and that actually the team lets me put down my guard. I can actually drop my defenses. I don't have to be ready to run when it's true, right? And so the thing with anxiety, or even that pressure you were feeling, that nervousness, it's okay for short periods of time. We're meant to have that. The challenge or the problem is when we get locked into chronic states of that mobilized, defensive, protective, aggressive, quote, anxiety. That's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to interrupt that pattern and find places and faces and spaces where our body drops the defending, lets down its guard, and can actually feel safe in stillness. That's what it's about.
That's what it's about. And I'm very grateful to you for jumping in and putting it that way. And that, yes, we've begun talking a lot more about anxiety as, like you say, this bodily reaction. And that we can bring ourselves, we can move our nervous system state. We have awareness, and we can think about places and faces and spaces and the tools in our toolkit, the habit of safety that you mentioned before, in that it just opens the world up for us, doesn't it? Because we have these reflexive, these predictable responses. Our physiology responds because of what our nervous system has detected. There is an awareness around that we can develop. We can think about how we relate to it. We can think about the stories that come up when that's happening. We can, I've said to listeners before, we can ask if those stories are helpful. Usually they're not. And then we can use that habit of safety that we can develop, the routines, the strategies that work with our body, with our physiology, to coax our nervous system back to a space where we're have enough mobilization to perform, not so much that we're moving towards immobilization, and not so little that we're underperforming because we're not in that kind of play zone. And I think that's a really nice place to finish today. And speaking of the play zone, please tell our listeners, anybody from whatever stage they're working in or on or with other people, how they can work with you, because I know you coach coaches, and that you work across business and across sport, how people can locate you online and your work and connect and work with you, please, Michael.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so first place is my website, and it's just appropriately called theplayzone.com. So really easy. Second, I started a platform on Psychology Today called The Pressure Paradox. And so I'm writing columns that are really talking about this, what's really going on beneath the behaviors in a culture, as we've talked about, that is just bombarding us with competition and evaluation and change. And so that's another place to look. It's called The Pressure Paradox on Psychology Today. I provide a number of different types of courses, some for the general public and some for high performers themselves who want to learn a little more of this methodology. And I do that on Polyvagal Institute's website. So there's a course that I call the Playzone, and it's this optimizing our performance through the physiology. And then I do a deep dive for all types of coaches, consultants, business, stage performers, and those who are actually helping others in whatever discipline they want to help them. I do a deep dive, and that also is a course that's a mixture. It's a hybrid. So we meet live as a group, and then I have online curriculum. So that's a really in-depth course. There are close to 250 coaches now that have gone through that internationally. It's called the Playzone Pro. And that I'm really, really happy about. And that community is all over the globe and has all different types of leaders and coaches and consultants. It's fascinating. It's an awesome group. So those are the places.
Thank you. It's incredible the work that you're doing. I know that you see the sort of the founder of Polyvagal Theory, or we wouldn't call him the founder, would he? Pioneer in the area of, how would you describe Stephen Porges?
He's the creator. He's the creator, founder of Polyvagal Theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're doing such important work, and the way that you talk about your work is really easy for us to take on board and to understand ourselves a whole lot better, and to be able to make some changes, even if it's just beginning with awareness, and more beyond that when we're ready, that can make a really meaningful difference to the way that we perform in life. And when the stakes are high as well as sort of the everyday challenges that life kind of throws our way. So very grateful for you and for your time. And I know that you call Dr. Stephen Porges a mentor. He's the creator of Polyvagal Theory. And so, really thankful for you and the work you're doing and the way you're bringing your work to the world, and very appreciative of your patience at the beginning and for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. To me, that's what this is all about, is meeting others like yourself and trying to just do good work in the world, or really good play. This is, and sharing things that you're really, truly passionate about, and maybe helping a few along the way. It's beautiful.
It is.
Thank you.
It is. No, thank you, Michael. And thank you, listeners. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. It is always such a privilege to have your time and your company. I never take it for granted. Always grateful for the beautiful feedback I am getting and receiving. So thank you very much. And I hope you really enjoyed this. I found it fascinating, this conversation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback. So jump on Instagram, drop me an email, wherever you like to connect. I'd love to hear what you thought too. And I will be back again next week with a brand new episode. So I'll see you then. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.